All right, interesting discussion on Twitter the other day about the sort of, I guess, really the definition of diabetes in a way. And, when most of us think about diabetes, we mostly think about blood sugar as that is how it's been classically defined. We now define it as a fasting blood glucose above 126 or a random blood glucose over 200 or something like that. And that definition based on blood glucose has evolved over time. It used to be, it was 140 and different numbers. And but that's really not what diabetes is. I mean, when really, whether or not our blood glucose is high or not is not the real concern in diabetes. The real concern in diabetes is the end organ issues, blindness, kidney disease, heart disease, amputations, erectile dysfunction, on and hypertension, all these things that occur when these tissues are exposed to whatever the pathophysiology of diabetes might be, whether it's a inefficient, and I'm talking specifically about type 2 diabetes here, I should be very clear about this. Whether it's chronic hyperglycemia, which clearly can be problematic in certain situations, whether it's insulin undersecretion or oversecretion, depending on where you are in the disease process. So we're really concerned about the end organ damage. And why is that? Why do I say that? Because, well, it's becoming more apparent as we see more and more people utilizing CGMs that there are, for instance, some very high-level athletes which have no evidence of any end organ dysfunction that chronically maintain higher than what would be considered average blood glucose. So they have relative hyperglycemia without apparent diabetic end organ disease, nephropathy, retinopathy, so on and so forth. And back historically, as I've pointed out a long time ago, there are metabolic studies on different polar populations like the Inuit who, at least upon initial examination, ran blood glucoses, fasting blood glucoses typically in the 120s, and so on and so forth, and they had no evidence of diabetic disease. Additionally, we look at carnivorous animals, dolphins, cats, they typically run higher blood glucoses, again, without end organ damage typically. And again, we're not cats and dolphins, but that's just a way to look at some of this. And so we're really looking at, what is going on at the end result that really matters, and the numbers become somewhat less important. Now, the reason the numbers are high, again, like I mentioned about with cholesterol yesterday, is important. One of the thoughts is that diabetes, we see blood glucose elevation as a late phase of diabetes. A lot of people can have diabetic disease. They can have organ damage preceding the elevations in blood glucose. So pre-diabetes, in my view, is basically diabetes. I mean, why we call it pre-diabetes and we have this arbitrary cutoff is kind of, in my view, kind of silly. If you're pre-diabetic and you're starting to manifest complications, whether they're subtle or not, you should be treating yourself, right? And so, one of the things that occurs is we do see fatty infiltration of many of our tissues, our organs, our cells. Why is that occurring? Now that's a real kicker here. Supposedly, well, not supposedly, the insulin receptors are, interfered with when fat, particularly things like ceramides, accumulate in the, within the cellular matrix. And those things are often associated with things like palmitic acid, which is a saturated fat, which is found in our circulation. Now, interestingly, saturated fat we consume is not necessarily related to the saturated fat that appears in our blood. Jeff Volek has shown this in a series of studies over the years that people eating higher saturated fat often had lower saturated fat accumulating in their blood, which then would lead to less likelihood of perhaps these ceramides accumulating. But irrespective of how they get there, this accumulating of fat does occur, and it does seem to be part of this process. Now, if we took a different dietary strategy, some people, it's all sugar. Well, there are people that eat basically an all-carbohydrate diet with very little fat and very little protein. These are the fruitarians. Now, what happens to a fruitarian? They typically become incredibly thin. Most of them are emaciated. Perhaps some of them have a fatty liver, perhaps. It is probably not the best strategy long-term for most people, as you will undoubtedly become ultimately deficient in something. If you don't supplement, this is sort of the whole vegan argument. Veganism will work for weight loss for sure because you consume all this food. Much of it we cannot digest. If you're eating this high fiber vegetarian vegan diet, leaves are not a good source of food. I'm sorry, they're just not. You talk to anybody that's had a colectomy where they have an ileostomy, all those leaves just end up being pooped out. So you don't really absorb much nutrition. So the point of eating, in my view, is to absorb nutrition, is to nourish your body. When you're eating leaves, you're not nourishing your body. You're basically maybe avoiding overconsumption of garbage, which can be helpful, but it's certainly not the best strategy to get high quality nutrition into your body. What about people that so you can do a fruitarian diet. You can eat massive amounts of sugar and fruit and not get fat, but that is probably not a good long-term strategy. What about just eating pure fat? Like a high-level ketogenic diet where you're consuming massive amounts of fat. Well, many of those people do lose weight as well, and why is that? Because they find that they, again, same sort of issue. They consume fat to the point where it is no longer absorbed, and then they just they just end up passing it in their stool in the form of diarrhea. Also, perhaps, maybe not the best strategy for weight loss in my view. Again, my thought is let's maximize how much nutrition we absorb. Now, one of the problems, probably the biggest problem we see here is a combination of both the fat and the carbohydrates mixed together, i.e. things like processed food. The donut would be the classic example. High in refined carbohydrate, grains, sugars, and some sort of oil. There's people out there that will say, it's not animal fats, it is, these polyunsaturated seed oils, which have basically taken over our added fat consumption, which they clearly have. And there's clearly the correlational data that's there. Is that causative? Again, some people would argue very vehemently that yes, absolutely is. There's others that would say, well, hold on, the data doesn't necessarily support that. There is, in my view, why are we over consuming energy, calories, fruit, not sugars, fats, in the first place? And that really is kind of the heart of the matter. These foods are low satiety foods, and I know the satiety per calorie, protein energy concept being kicked around I think there is something to that, and the fact that why do I overconsume foods? Well, they're not providing me the satisfaction that I do that. Now, can you get that through things like a carnivore diet? Well, of course you can. Of course you can. You can consume meat to a certain point, and then you say, okay, I've had enough. And that works quite well, and it's often quite well at providing long-term satiation, or satiety rather, where you are just full for hours and hours and hours. You may only want to eat once a day or twice a day or something like that. And guess what? By the way, all that nutrition, or the vast majority of that nutrition is being absorbed. I mean, this is fairly clear. You can see that in the reduction in bowel frequency, the reduction in stool volume, because again, you're not wasting all this product. You're getting high quality nutrition into your body. And oh, by the way, many people who have diabetic pathophysiology, whether it's prediabetes, diabetes, insulin resistance, or so on and so forth, see a resolution of those both subjective and objective markers, both with regard to blood glucose management, with regard to end organ function. We see that with kidney disease normalizing. We see that with hypertension normalizing. We see that with retinopathy going away. So diabetes is, not a disease of blood glucose in a sense that's all that's going on. It's much more than that. It's a pervasive disease that affects literally every aspect of our body, and it is incredibly worrisome that half our population is now pre-diabetic. I mean, that is very, very scary, and they're over-consuming something that's probably getting them there. My sort of thought is it's mostly this ultra-processed kind of garbagey food that most of us indulge in, and we're told that, oh, it's okay to eat this stuff in moderation. In my view, some food should never be eaten, quite honestly. I mean, I use sort of the blue, Captain Crunch flavored maple syrup. I mean, that to me is not food, should never be eaten. The fact that we have a food supply which is, 70% ultra processed with, not just the caloric content or the fat or the protein or the macronutrient content, but I mean, artificial flavors, artificial colors, preservatives, thickening agents, emulsifiers, all these things that, if a food needs an artificial flavor for you to consume it, think about that. Why the hell would you eat that? This is not something you're designed to eat. And the same thing again with leaves. I wouldn't eat leaves. Who eats leaves by themselves and actually enjoys that? There's a reason this stuff tastes bitter and it's unpleasant because, in my view, it's not something we're supposed to eat. I know people push, eat more leafy greens and all that stuff. Well, leafy greens you're not going to absorb, most of them. It is not food for a human being. We have very little capacity to obtain very much nutrition from it. Now, is it a weight loss stage? Yeah, you could eat cardboard. Right? You could eat cardboard and you'd have the same effect essentially. And it doesn't taste very good. It takes up room in your gut. You can't digest it. You can't absorb it. But if you fill your belly full of cardboard, well, guess what? You're probably not going to eat a lot. You're probably not going to want to eat a lot of other stuff. You're probably feel kind of sick to your stomach. So anyway, some thoughts on diabetes. Let me know what you guys think. I know it's a complex topic, and certainly, and this is a point about the athletes. Higher blood glucose. We don't know it all right now. I think in the age of continuous glucose monitors, continuous ketone monitors, we'll have continuous insulin monitors and continuous cholesterol monitors, perhaps. All this will change what we know about disease. And so anybody, again, what drives me crazy is you can take one reading on somebody and put them on a medication for the rest of your life, i.e. like a statin. Oh my God, your cholesterol was up this one day, and therefore we're going to put you on statin for the rest of your life. That's not how you make decisions, in my view. All right, guys, this has been a long one. Let me know what you guys think. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.